following talk is interspersed with some well-known songs that you've heard down through your life, and I'm just attempting to show you how you're being conditioned, along with certain agendas, with the songs you hear, just as you are with the movies you see. It's all predictive programming along a certain path.
Don't know much about history, don't know much biology, don't know much about a science book, don't know much about the French I took.
Well, just like that song there, we're all living in the dark. We don't know much about history, we don't know much about social politics, we don't know much about the movements which have been created down through history, which appear to be different from each other on the outside, but when you look at their policies and their goals, they all tend to go towards the same destination. And when you find things all tending to come together, as the song goes, towards the same destination, some people will clue into the fact that there's a common guiding hand here. Societal changes it can be likened to a herd of sheep who've been in the same field for a few years or even a generation. And the sheep themselves are totally unaware of what their purpose is. They think they're there to be happy and to chew the cud, and they know the shepherd. They know the shepherd's face as he comes in, and he'll smile and he'll whistle to them, and he'll even scratch some of their ears, you know. And of course, when he wants them to eventually move to another field, he has to motivate them and get them ready to move. Because something which has been static for a long time, it takes a while to get into gear, you might say, without losing control. And that's how society is, because society has been planned. You might say we've been farmed, like Charles Fort said. We've been farmed basically down through the centuries for different purposes by a hidden elite and a very high aristocracy, which uses lower aristocracy to do the actual work, you might say. And when they have to need people for wars, they breed them up. They'll allow them to have more food for themselves. They always allowed them to have plenty, drink alcohol and so on, and even encourage sort of parties and festivals. And that way, they knew they could keep the population up, because during the festival times, even religion would relax, people copulated and offspring were produced. And those guys would be the next crop for the next war, which was maybe planned 18 to 20 years down the road. And this is pretty standard all down through history. We can read about it from the days of Plato, where he talks about the necessity of culling the excess populations of the Grecian islands, because they were islands and they could only stand so much of a population, and even the influx of slaves from all their wars would become a problem sometimes, and they would arm these slaves and put them in the army and have them fight their neighbors, and that way they culled down the herd, you might say. And in those days it was talking about quite openly by the aristocracy. Slaves were cheap. The aristocracy saw those of the non-aristocracy as a separate animal, you might say. And nothing has changed up to the present. So for this particular talk, we're looking at how society has been shaped from the 1800s in Europe and America, world over really, by different groups. And one of these groups will be the Fabian Society, which was established in London, England, in the late 1800s. The founders of the Fabian Society consisted primarily, at least as far as the public are concerned, with Sidney Webb, who was a lifelong bureaucrat for the British government, who tried his best to work up and kiss the feet of the guys above him, hoping that he would be accepted as an aristocrat one day. But his wife really was called Beatrice, and Beatrice Webb was from an aristocratic family called the Potters, so she was Beatrice Potter. It might sound familiar to people. And Beatrice Potter, her family, her father, was a sort of Halliburton of his day, because he would have contracts with the British Army, with the Crown, and wherever they went abroad to slaughter people and kick them off their land, they would devastate and burn down houses, and he would move in with his little huts that he'd sell back to the British government, and the taxpayers would pay for them, of course, and they'd put up these little shacks for the people that they'd simply dispossessed recently abroad. So the same system was in place then as it is today. Names change. Sometimes the names are actually the same family lineages, but through marriage, etc., we have different surnames from the female and the male lineages. So the founders of the Fabian were the Webbs, and of course we had George Bernard Shaw, who was a playwright, and just like today, the playwrights in those days were funded by the big corporations, charitable corporations, as they call themselves, or philanthropic organizations, and they would tell the authors basically what themes to write upon on social issues, and to write them into novels so that the public who read them would have their opinions of things altered in such a direction that they would be all for a particular type of change, unsuspectingly, really, that this has been organized by professional psychologists, you might say,